love is in the air. Not really, though. DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Episode 8, Review and Breakdown. Hey Twisted people, it's your Twisted Girl next door here, and today I am doing a review and breakdown of DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Episode 8. Now, if you're new here, this is the way it goes. I give my overall thoughts of the episode, as in my overall thoughts of the episode, the happenings in the episode, and what I thought about that, ship talk, because I do love talking about relationships, predictions, which I'm usually really bad at when it comes to this particular show, and finally, I do comic book comparison, because as you know, or may not know, these characters are based off of the comic book series Doom Patrol. Overall, this was a really solid episode. I really liked it. It wasn't like, it didn't become like my favorite episode of the season. That still goes to the horror-tinged one a few episodes back, but I think it was solid, and I'm always a sucker for dance musical breaks when it comes to anything. Theater kid here. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fine. I really liked the introduction of Danny the Street, which I'll talk about when it comes to comic book talk. It wasn't like so introspective. Stuff happened, but once again, we didn't get any really, closer to finding the chief, although there was something that happened at the end with Vic that may lead to something, but in terms of the episode moving the larger arc ahead, not so much, although we did get some insight into a few of the characters. Vic and Larry help Danny the Street. So the episode starts off basically with an agent, Agent Wilson, who goes into this, what looks like a mysterious place, a street that seems to be talking to him and whatnot, and then he disappears. Later, Doom Patrol is contacted by what appears to be a living, breathing street that tells them that they may have some insight or connection to Chief, which makes it so Vic and Larry go to investigate. Danny tells them that the Bureau of Normalcy is after them. Once the Bureau of Normalcy is mentioned, we get a Larry flashback where it appears that Larry had a connection to the Bureau of Normalcy, more so that he was used as a weapon and experimented on against his will when it came to the Bureau of Normalcy. So that gave us a little bit more insight to Larry's past after the accident happened. Some awesome dream dance sequences later, and finally Vic and Larry face off with the Bureau of Normalcy. Darren Jones, the top agent, basically infiltrates and gets inside Danny the Street. That sounded weird to say, but they get inside, and so they face off with the Bureau of Normalcy. And they win! But more so, the group of the Perpetual Cabaret wins, because those are the main ones that take it off when it comes to going after Jones and the others. And Morally Corrupt, who was like the lead, aka formerly known as Agent Wilson, takes the lead in beating Jones's butt as his former partner. So yeah, that was cool. When everyone starts to celebrate, Vic has a conversation with Danny the Street, asking them if they know anything about how to help Chief. And Vic does mention Mr. Nobody, and that seems to scare Danny the Street, where Danny at first tells Vic that they can't help Vic. And, Vic pushes, and eventually Danny the Street shows him a comic book that has written inside of it, "The deal I made with Doom." Or more so, I made a deal with Doom. Danny the Street then transports Vic and Larry back to the Doom Patrol headquarters mansion. So basically, that was a nice, fun plot line. I mean, I think the majority of that plot line didn't move anything forward, but then the end with the comic book helped to move the overall plot forward. Hopefully, we'll see what more Vic finds when he's reading the comic book, and I think it worked. I had a lot of fun watching the dance scenes and the music numbers. It was so great to see Larry kind of have a moment of happiness, which I was so disappointed that it was a dream sequence. I wanted that to be real. I mean, I knew that he wasn't going to be able to be transported and back into his former self, but I thought maybe Danny was able to do something where he could actually see himself as he used to be as he was singing, which I think would have been really nice for Larry. So it kind of sucked when it flashes back and you realize he's just been sitting there the whole time. But it was nice to see before Danny transported them back that Larry was singing in the cabaret. So eventually Larry went back and did sing, even though he was like, what, did I sound bad? Which it was a very nice kind of approach to it. And I think we're getting better at making it so Larry's not completely so tortured all the time, even though he had his moments in this episode of wanting to run away, but eventually, facing off with the Bureau of Normalcy and saying, hey, I'm here and you didn't kill me completely. So I thought that was a poignant moment for the character, which really worked. And I thought it worked that they made it so Larry and Vic paired off this time. And I think that really works for this show where, they're all cohesive enough, even though they're totally dysfunctional, that you can mix and match the characters to see the different dynamics between them. An episode or so back, we had Vic and Cliff. And in this episode, we got Vic and Larry, which also worked. And I think they had a fun time with Danny the Street. Rita and Cliff try to get Jane back. So the episode also starts off with Cliff being fixed by Vic when it comes to the rat incident from last week. Oh my gosh, I'm still not over it. I still get a little itchy thinking about what happened to Cliff. And he was making some jokes throughout about, needing Lysol and, oh my gosh, has anything ever crawled inside of you, to Vic, and Vic being like, no, of course not. So that was pretty funny. Eventually, Cliff gets a call from what sounds like Jane, but it's not Jane, of course, telling him to tell Rita to come to where she knows that she will find her for some girl time. We learn from Rita that this personality of Jane is called Karen, and she's a lovesick psychopath. Karen has went to find Milquetoast Doug, as Rita calls him, and puts him under a love spell to pretty much take her back, because I guess she goes back and forth with him over who knows how many years, and she's put a love spell on him and his family, and she wants to marry him, Karen, and she pretty much wants to stay there and basically live this life. And I guess she does this whenever Jane or the rest of them, something traumatic happens and she needs to run away. She becomes Karen for a bit. And so Cliff is left outside during this time. And so Karen's pretty much about to marry Doug. And Rita's also seems to be under the spell. Cliff comes in and we see that he is unaffected by Karen's charm of eyes. And he basically triggers for Hammerhead to come back out. And in the midst of that, when Hammerhead is about to stab Doug, Karen reemerges, but then something happens where she's dragged back to the underground of, Jane's psyche, and something's dragging her back, and she's telling that thing to get off of her and let her go. And the thing is, though, another personality doesn't emerge like it usually does when the other personality goes away. And basically Jane is left in a catatonic state. I think this plot line was fun and twisted. I love the fact that when Karen is reuniting with Doug, they're actually playing the Doom Patrol theme song, but they're playing it in a romantic way. I thought that was perfect. And she's not my favorite personality, but I think with every personality that we've gotten from Jane so far, they've all been very interesting. And they all, like I've said before, have their own background and stories and things they do and go off, total plot lines. And we saw that with Karen, with the Doug character, Milquetoast Doug, as Rita called him. And, I also thought it was pretty cute that Karen is very close with Rita. She snaps at her, but they actually kind of have a real friendship, it was sort of nice to see, because Jane and Rita don't seem to get along at all. And then you had this moment where Rita sort of gets drawn into being friendly with Jane. And I think it showed also that, Rita is kind of hard pressed for a real friend, or a female friend anyway, when it comes to it. And even though Karen was psychotic, it was kind of nice to see them kind of do the girl talk thing. And I think in some weird way, maybe Rita, even before the spell, sort of enjoyed that a little bit. So that was interesting. And I thought it was very interesting that Karen's powers did not work on Cliff. And I think that might play into his own powers because of the fact that he's mostly metal, that maybe it didn't work with him. I'm not sure. I thought that stood out to me. And I also love the dance break with him and the little boy. Oh my gosh, I love that, because I felt so sorry for Cliff last episode. Oh my gosh, that rat. Yeah, I felt sorry for him. So it was nice that this kid came around and was not afraid of him, puts on the costume and does the breakdancing with him. And I really hope we see that kid again. I want that kid to come back around because I don't think they were too far from the man. I think they were still in town. So I really hope that the kid comes back and maybe somehow befriends Cliff and maybe becomes, something of a friend to him, because I think Cliff needs that right now. I mean, he lost his daughter in a way, and I'm not saying he needs another kid. I'm just saying maybe that would help him, in being able to take another little person under his wing. Maybe that would ease the pain of losing his daughter. Karen's personality was straight up like a horror movie version of a Nicholas Sparks movie / novel, and I appreciated that. Cliff and Jane. Now, I'm just going to put this out here. I know some of y'all have said that y'all don't see a ship forming and that maybe I was just drawing it more so from the comic books when it comes to the ship of Cliff and Jane, and maybe, Cliff looks at her more like a daughter. I don't think so anymore. I think the last 2 episodes or so has really established that he does not look at her like a daughter. I think there is something of a romance there, and I don't think it's a straight out romance. I think it's more so these people are really screwed up, so they got to get past that point. Well, they'll never get past the point of not being screwed up, but like being accepting of it. So I do think they're still going with that, because I mean, honestly, Cliff and Jane, not to talk too much about the comic books in this particular section, that's very much their plot line. Not their whole plot line, but it's very much their main romance. And it seems a little weird that they went and explored that a little bit. And I think I saw it a little bit in this episode, especially with Karen not wanting Cliff around. And maybe for some reason she and the others know that Cliff can be a trigger for Jane, that she's grown fond of Cliff. And I think that moment where Cliff was the one that was able to bring her out. And he seemed a little jealous that she was about to marry Doug. So I think they're definitely leaning towards more of a romance ship. Yeah, so for comic book talk, I wanted to talk about Danny the Street, because Danny the Street is an awesome character and also very much in the comic books. So Danny the Street first appeared in the Doom Patrol comics back in 1990. And Danny the Street is named after the female impersonator, Danny LaRue. LaRue is French for the street. Get it? And in the comic books in the 1990s, when Danny was first introduced, they very much still had the same kind of sensibilities, very much the whole drag performance being, flamboyant in that sense and things of that nature. And they seem to have kept that very much so for the live action, which I really appreciated. The only thing they did change, I guess, was the emphasis on gender neutral pronouns, which I thought was a nice, updated, sort of woke way of dealing with Danny the Street. There are other incarnations of Danny Street and different versions of Danny. Pretty much has a lot of transformations throughout Danny's history in the DC comics. This was the first sort of introduction of Danny being a street, like a living street. But Danny does take other forms. Like there's Danny the Brick, Danny the World, Danny the Ambulance. So they really ride that sort of thing. And I'm kind of interested, no, not even kind of, I'm very interested to see if we'll see more versions of Danny in those interpretations that we got in the comics for Doom Patrol live action. One thing that's slightly different, at least from the onset, is that in the comics, Jane and Danny are close, or more so, they have connected plot lines and things that they do. And in this particular case, when it comes to the live action, it's interesting that they didn't have it so Jane met Danny yet. So something tells me Danny will probably come back around, and maybe we'll see that connection between them for future episodes. My prediction is that Vic will read that comic book and find a clue. I know, it's just like, really? Really? Yeah, that's what you think? Sure. How far-fetched is that? Yeah, I know. I'm playing it safe. But I honestly, I think playing it safe is the easiest route to go of going to the very basic prediction when it comes to this show. Because if I was to even try to guess what Mr. Nobody wanted or who was going to help them and all of that, I would be so wrong and wouldn't even know where to start. So I'm going to go with the very basic. I'm going to be a basic B in this particular case and say that Vic will find a clue in that comic book that Danny gave him. Alright, so what did you think of Doom Patrol Episode 8? This episode had some music, it had some dancing, it had some singing along, and it had the perpetual cabaret and Danny the Street. Did you like Danny the Street? Did you like the plot line? What are you looking forward to? What are your predictions? Can you do better than me? You probably can do better than me when it comes to predictions. So give them to me in the comment section. Let me know what you're thinking. And also, be sure to subscribe so that you're the first to know when I post my videos of all things horror, dark fantasy, and dark superhero. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.